Welcome to the July 6th, 2023 Des Moines Area Metropolitan Planning Organization Transportation Technical Committee. We'll call this meeting to order. That brings us to item 2, which is looking for an approval of the agenda. Tracy had sent out the agenda. Can I get a motion and a second, please, for approval of our agenda today?
So moved, Huesman.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Rudy.
Thanks, Rudy. All right, we got a motion and a second. Again, we are doing the meeting online today, so we were not going to have everyone unmute and say aye. We'll just ask anyone opposed to the motion speak up. And so are there any questions, discussion on the motion on the agenda? Okay, is anyone opposed to the motion? Thank you. Motion carries. All right, that brings us to item 3. This is I'm looking for a motion and a second on the approval of the meeting minutes for the June 1st, 2023 meeting.
So moved, Huesman.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Second, Rudy.
Thanks again, Rudy. All right, we got a motion and a second. Does anyone have any questions, discussion, comments on the meeting minutes, please? Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Okay, hearing none, that motion passes. All right, that brings us to item 4. This is a report and a vote on the final federal fiscal year 2024 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program. Zach, are you available to discuss this one?
Yes, thank you. Staff submitted the draft tip back on June 15th to Iowa DOT for them to review and provide comments to us. We received a handful of minor comments back from the DOT, all of which have been addressed and incorporated into the final document. We are waiting for Polk County to finalize a few things in their county 5-year program. They had to make a couple of amendments that will be voted on early next week. Once those are done on their 5-year program side, they'll filter up into the final tip, and we'll include those projects in the final tip before we send it off to the DOT by the July 15th deadline. Like I said, otherwise, everything that was in the draft tip was good, minus those few handful of things that they commented on, which mostly had to do with a few project descriptions that needed to be slightly tweaked, and then some funding totals that just needed to be updated slightly. So nothing major. This will be before you for your approval. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Okay, I'm sitting there talking muted. Thanks, Zach. Is there any questions for Zach? All right, can I get a motion and a second, please, for approval?
It's Montoya. I move approval.
Thanks, Luis.
Second, Rudy.
Thank you, Rudy. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion or questions on the motion on the table here? All right, is anyone opposed to the motion? Hearing none, consider that item passed. Thank you, Zach. All right, that brings us to item 5. This is a report and optional vote on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan consultant approval. Zach, are you able to talk to this one too?
Yes. So just wanted to give you an update on where we're at with the process of selecting a consultant. As I believe we discussed last month, we had 3 RFPs submitted to us, all from very qualified firms. FHU, SRF, and Tool Design were the main firms that submitted with their sub-consultants that are listed there on the screen before you. Not a lot of response to the RFP, but we were very happy with the quality of the responses that we got. So we did end up interviewing all 3 of the firms. The selection committee that was put in place to make a determination or a recommendation on which consultant we should go with is listed there on the screen before you. If you go to the next slide, the interviews were held on June 28th. We held those in the afternoon. Each team received approximately 30 minutes to present their proposal to the selection committee, and then that was followed by approximately 20 minutes of questions from the selection committee. All the presentations went really well. The selection committee then proceeded to score the proposals and the interviews separately. The proposals were scored out of 100 points, and the interview portion was scored out of 45 points. So there's a total of 145 points available. Once the scores were submitted, staff combined those scores, and as the RFP had stated, the team with the highest score would be the one that would be considered the preferred consultant. Next slide, please. So after compiling all the scores from the selection committee, Tool Design, along with HR Green, Confluence, and HDR Engineering, had the highest score. They scored 119 out of 45. So they are considered the preferred consultant to move forward with. That is the recommendation from the selection committee to move forward with Tool Design. So the next steps would be to enter into, once we present this to exec next week, if they approve that, we would enter into contract negotiations with Tool, and then we would come back in August with a contract for the executive and policy committees to vote on. So the issue before you today is to give staff approval to enter into contract negotiations with Tool Design. So that's our update, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, it's definitely looking at the list of firms there. You got 3 strong responses. So tough job and great job for the committee, and I appreciate everyone on the selection committee who spent their time and reviewed those. That's three outstanding groups of teams there. So, are there any questions for from our Transportation Technical Committee for Zach here?
Zach, this is Luis. I'm curious if we'll be providing any feedback to the submitters.
Yes, we plan on providing
Okay.
feedback.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for Zach? All right, hearing no questions, can I get a motion for support and approval of the selection committee's recommendation to work with Tool Design on entering into negotiations for a contract?
Yeah, this is Montoya. I'll move approval.
Thank you, Luis.
Rudy, I'll second.
Thank you, Rudy. Okay, we have a motion, a second on the table. Is there any discussion, comments, or questions on the motion on the table here? So again, this is to support the selection committee's recommendation and move forward with authorizing staff to work with Tool Design in negotiating a contract to bring back to August. So. Okay, hearing none, is there anyone opposed to the motion that's been seconded? Okay, hearing none, we'll consider that motion passed. Again, thank you, Selection Committee. Thank you, Zach. Awesome to move forward in that effort. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to item 6. This is a report on the MPO 2020 urban area boundary. Andrew, are you available to discuss this one?
I am, thank you.
Thank you.
So just as a quick refresher, following each decennial census, federal law requires cooperation between the state and MPOs to update the urban area boundary. Just as a reminder as well, the U.S. Census defines urban areas as densely settled areas consisting of 2,000 or more housing units or 5,000 or more people. So if you don't meet that definition, you're considered rural. Prior to 2020, the Census Bureau relied on population density only and didn't include housing units as part of that calculation, and defined urban as 2,500 people or more. So in January, Federal Highway updated the geographic shape files for the 2020 urban areas with population and housing unit data So over the summer and fall, the Iowa DOT and the MPO will work to create and adjust the final UAB, or urban area boundary. So adjustments to UABs should be approved by the Iowa DOT and then the Federal Highway Division later this year. Next slide. So to give you an idea what we're talking about with a UAB, this map was created by the DOT, and I'll point out a couple of things to note with this. First, I guess would be red line that circles the Des Moines Metro. That is our current planning area boundary. That's separate from the urban area boundary. The connection between the two is that by federal law, our planning area has to encompass at least our urban area or urban area boundary. The area highlighted in gray is our urban area in 2010. And then the area highlighted in blue is the urban area in 2020. So as you can see, the urban area actually has shrank quite a bit. And a lot of that has to do with the way that the census changed their rules defining how many hops, skips, jumps, those sorts of things they can incorporate in defining urban areas. Another big change was in 2010, in order to, you had to have all your urban area connected. In 2020, you are now no longer required to have different parts of your urban area connected by area. So in this case, Bondurant, as you can see, doesn't connect with the Des Moines urban area, but it is technically still considered part of that. Same with Norwalk. There are rural areas between the two, built up areas of the Des Moines urban area and Norwalk. However, Norwalk is still considered within the Des Moines urban area. And the reason for that is that both of those communities share corporate boundaries with communities that are within the Des Moines urban area. And so the census has decided that those now are, you can include islands, quote unquote, as part of an urban area. A couple things to note here is that Polk City, who used to be part of the 2010 urban area of Des Moines, is now considered its own urban area since it has a population of 5,000 or more. And Carlisle is no longer considered part of the Des Moines urban area, as considered rural because it doesn't meet that 5,000 population threshold. And it's something I'm going to get into in just a second, but wanted to point out here too, what the urban area boundary is something that we can control here at the MPO and through the DOT's process. However, urban areas are defined by the census, and that's not something we can change. The MPO really utilizes the planning area boundary for defining what STBG and TAP funding we get. PL funds, the money that the MPO receives that we use for operations, paying expenses, that sort of thing, actually comes from the urban area. So that's already been set in stone. That's defined by the census. The urban area boundary, the thing that we can control, really kind of affects funding as well as the federal functional classification system. Next slide. So to kind of highlight that fact, the UAB defines eligibility for several federal and state grant programs, or programs, I should say. For the federal functional classification system that I just mentioned, the highway performance monitoring system, STBG and TAP funding. UABs with 50,000 in population or more, the UAB typically defines the jurisdiction or responsibility between an MPO and an RPA. However, our MPO utilizes our planning area for that purpose. We also utilize our planning area boundary or area for STBG and DAP funding as well. Next slide. So the other part of that is the federal functional classification updates that typically occur with every decennial census. So the timeline for that is starting in fall. Systems planning will begin to identifying UAB related federal functional classification system changes, and we'll review that with us and identify things to incorporate in the changes. But also concurrently, while they're doing that, we at the MPO can also identify additional FFC changes that's not associated with the UAB update, or it could be, but we can identify changes as well and then recommend those to the DOT for approval. As a reminder, federal functional classification updates, those have to go through the MPO. Individual communities cannot request those directly to the DOT. We have to make that request on behalf of communities. So we will begin soliciting changes from communities as part of this process as well. I believe I went back and looked, and the last time the MPO requested changes was in 2016. I believe that's it for me. So I'd be happy to take any questions anyone may have.
So Andrew, just to, missed, you said it already, but the area in gray,
Mhm.
the urban boundary from 2010 used to be, or was eligible for STBG, for example, but now it's only the area in blue. So essentially the gray area that you see around was eligible for STBG, and now they're not.
No, everywhere is eligible for STBG. Really, it's how we get our STBG funding.
Okay.
That's really that typically is defined by our urban area boundary. And the process that we're going to go through to define that smooths that out from the census, running along corporate boundaries and then incorporating natural features, that sort of thing. But that's really the funding source. Everywhere is eligible within our planning area for that.
Okay.
And that won't change. But we are kind of unique in the state of Iowa in that we utilize our planning area, and that's something, an agreement we have with SERPTA that defines how we get our STBG and TAP funding.
Okay.
Typically, it's the urban area boundary.
I was trying to understand like what really changes for the
Yep.
area that was removed from the urban area.
Yeah, and like I said, the only requirement that we have with our planning area is that we have to incorporate the urban area boundary. But
Okay.
we can go beyond that. Typically,
Okay.
our planning area has to incorporate or should incorporate planned development over the next 20 years. So that's why you see it grow beyond what our built up urban environment looks like.
Okay. So not much really changes from the community standpoint, like Carlisle's sake, I guess. For that. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, good. All right. Any questions for Andrew?
Andrew, this is John Dostart. So the parts of Altoona that are not included in the urban area, is that the MPOs going through and tweaking that, or?
Not necessarily. The census really tightened up their definition of urban. So they started really looking at how many, what the built up environment looked like, and kind of eliminating the areas that don't have structures or housing units or that sort of thing. So they'll still be within the urban, our planning area, I should say. Our planning area, we adjust that periodically to make sure that that it's at least incorporating the corporate changes that communities have. So it'll still be all eligible. Basically, what's happening is it's just not technically part of the urban area. And I believe if we utilize the urban area for funding purposes, that would limit the amount of funding we get, but we don't do that. So it's really more a federal functional class is really where it's gonna pop up. But in reality, there's not a huge
So on those rural, the non-urban areas of Altoona, let's say,
sure.
we'd go off the county federal functional classification map then at that point?
No, you would use your own, and you can request changes. It's just the way that the federal functional classification gets defined is different in an urban setting versus a rural setting.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Berwick's an urban area?
Sorry, what?
Berwick is an urban area?
It has enough built up area that the census considers it. There's enough density, I would say,
Okay.
of buildings that they call it urban. Yes.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Andrew? Okay, hearing none. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate this report. Thank you. All right, next, that brings us to report on upcoming events. Z, are you able to talk to that one, please?
Yep, thank you. We've compiled a longer list of events for you, but I want to highlight a few that we've voted. So the Iowa County Engineers Association, they'll have their mid-year conference July 13th in Ames. The TRB will have the International Conference on Low Volume Roads in Cedar Rapids, July 23rd to 26th. Institute of Transportation Engineers will be meeting in Portland in August. And then coming up in the fall, in October, we have the APA Upper Midwest Conference, the Safe Routes to School, and Iowa states have various seminars and conferences as well. If you have any questions on these events, I'll be happy to take them.
Any questions for Z? All right, thanks, Z. I appreciate that. I know, like, our own John Davis is going to the ITE meeting in Portland, so if you see John there, he'll buy you a drink. Right, John? I'm offering you up, so. All right, thanks, Z. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
This brings us to item number 8. Are there any other non-action items of interest to the committee, please? Okay. Not hearing any. All right, that brings us to item 9, which is our next meeting date will be August 3rd, our typical time at 9:30 a.m. And then go into item 10. Let's see, consider this meeting adjourned. All right. Thanks, everybody. Everyone have a great day. Thank you. Thank you. So.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.